EAEA, and Andreas Fejes, professor in adult education and in adult education research at Linköping University, and chair of the board of the European Society for Research on the Education of Adults. And I'll let you introduce yourselves more in detail later on during the webinar. So let's have a look at the agenda for today. Implementing upskilling pathways, the frontiers in Portugal and Sweden. And kind of our idea with this webinar today is to discuss what are the next steps in our respective countries and to share experiences and perhaps compare a little bit where we are. And to do this, we will start off with some overview from Raffaela Kihrer around Portugal and Sweden. What is the current state and the challenges that we can see in adult education based on the work that EAEA is doing and the input from member organizations in the countries. And then we will move to input from Dina and perspectives from Portugal. Continue with Andreas' input from the Swedish side. And I know you are both, Dina and Andreas, you are both very much also involved in the European debate. So it's very nice to have you with us. You can both comment on the development in Portugal and Sweden, but also related to what is happening in other parts of Europe. Lastly, we will have time for reflections and questions together towards the end. And so for all participants, feel free to write in the chat or questions box. You will also have the chance to request the floor and to speak. We can enable your microphone if you like. And that's always good to be able to elaborate and reflect a bit more freely. All right. So our focus today is mainly how to what is needed to take the next steps in the support for low-skilled adults in Portugal and Sweden. Do we need better practice? Do we need better policy? That's the entry point. Do we have any questions before we get started and move on? And again, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Write a note of who you are or where you work or where you live, something like that. All right, without further delay, I think we should get started. We have a tight schedule for this hour. So please, Raffaela Kihrer, welcome to take the floor and to share some overview and perspectives.
Thanks so much for inviting me to this webinar to speak about our country report and what we found out about Portugal and Sweden, the latest developments in 2019. Before I get into detail on the results from Portugal and Sweden, I would like to give you an overview of our country reports, why we do that and how we do that. And how we get to our results. I'm not checking how I can move on. Okay, quite straightforward. So why do we do country reports? Because obviously the European Union publishes their country reports regularly. We see that there is an added value to give a civil society perspective on what is happening in adult education in Europe. And for us, it also has a second function because we are Europeans' main lobbying organization in the field of adult education. What we are doing is to constantly follow political processes at European level. That means monitoring of political processes, but also following up through advocacy work. So when we work on the country reports, they are also very useful to us to first of all provide an accessible overview to policymakers, but also adult education organizations and other stakeholders in Europe on the state of adult learning in this particular year or period we evaluate. But it also helps us to connect with each other within the adult education community, to learn from each other. I see that people can't hear me. I don't know why that is. Can I quickly ask? Yeah.
Okay, we can mostly hear you, Raffaela. Perhaps go a little bit more slow.
Okay, I'll try to.
And let's hope it works.
So the country reports are aiming to give an accessible overview of adult education, to connect with each other within the adult education community, to learn from each other, and to bring new insights and information that can be used in advocacy work at all levels, meaning also at the regional level, local level, national level, whichever levels you are working on. And then thirdly, we have these country reports also as a contribution to the European semester to influence this process at the European level, which is, as you may know, an annual cycle of economic and structural policy coordination by the European Commission. And how we do it is to create a survey. This is quite straightforward. It's composed of 20 to 30 questions on recent developments in the countries. This survey is sent to all members, and we aim to receive at least 50% response rate to make the country reports not, of course, representative in a strict statistical sense, but still representative of the EAEA membership. So now my presentation is gone in this view. How can I? Okay. And then we analyze the results against the background of European policies. And then the reports are printed and published online. You can also see the link here on this slide. And this is the cover from last year's country report. So for the pathways, in 2019, we saw that this initiative had a mixed uptake. Some of our members reported that it formed the basis of most of their country's policies at present, while others noted that it was not being actually implemented at all. So you see there's a large range of answers. In some countries, it's a guiding principle for policy making now, and in some countries it's, well, observed at best, but not implemented at all. And for a number of countries, the values in the Upskilling Pathways initiative are at least a guidance for creating policies at the national, regional, and local level. So now on the results for Portugal, we can see actually from Portugal quite a positive progress in the last few years concerning policy making. And there have been a number of important initiatives coming up that are striving to address issues such as low literacy levels among adults and low levels of participation of adults in education. There is particularly the Qualifica program, I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, Qualifica, that is fully aligned with the EU's Upskilling Pathways and includes a set of initiatives and tools such as tailor-made learning offers, recognition of prior learning, and a support to the registration of competences and training courses acquired. Other initiatives include, for example, the National Plan on Adult Literacy that is currently being developed. This aims to address the issue of high illiteracy in the country. And there is another program that focuses on high-level qualifications and increasing the employability of adults, but this has a particular emphasis on vocational education. And of course, civil society is very active and also proposes initiatives on its own. For example, a big project on literacy for democracy. So you can see also that civil society is gender setting in the sense of, for example, putting the issue of democracy and citizenship at the table. There are, however, a number of challenges for Portugal, and this is very much in line also with other countries, unfortunately. This is particularly the lack of steady and solid funding. We can see in Portugal funding is irregular and insufficient. And this can affect the capacity of adult education institutions to reach out to new learners and engage adult population in learning. Yeah, this has a direct link, of course, to the rate of adult participation in all forms of learning, and particularly of those groups that are furthest away from learning. So here what is a must actually is a concise and cohesive national educational strategy. This is coming out of the responses from members in Portugal. And then as a third point, I would also like to mention that society needs to be strengthened in Portugal for creating a strong national umbrella organization. You can see some other countries that have these kinds of national umbrella organizations, that the stronger they are, the more they can help adult education policies in their countries to be developed and well, increase rates of adult learning, of course, but also improve the funding situation. Now I would like to move on to Sweden, which has been one of the best practices for European adult learning in many years. And current initiatives include, for example, of course, Upskilling Pathways. Here, Swedish members said last year that Fokai schools, along with study associations, are very important to implement upskilling pathways from a grassroots level. And a second very important initiative at the national level is the Sustainable Development Goals, a global initiative actually, not a European one. And there is a plan for action already to implement the Agenda 2030 within education systems. And here, folk building and adult learning play a key role for this to happen. However, unfortunately, at the moment there is no additional funding for promoting this initiative. And I said before that Sweden has been a best practice for adult learning policies and support by the national level for many years. However, we have seen from our responses last year that Sweden is currently facing several challenges, and these relate particularly to the changes to the country's political scene. and that has to do with changes in the government and instability concerning its internal policies, and this has an impact, of course, on adult education policies. Also, EAEA members reported that there has been a major decrease in funding last year, which amounts to around 7.5 million euros, which is quite large. So this is an overview on our country reports and the situation in Portugal and Sweden. Thanks for your attention, and if you have any questions, then please feel free to put them now in the chat box or send me an email to my email address. Thank you.
Thank you, Raffaela. Very interesting. And I think we can get back to questions, comments, perhaps in after we've had the input also from Dina and Andreas and discuss together. But very concrete and good to get this overview. I would like to invite you, Dina, now to continue. We will load your presentation. So please feel free to start as it has been loaded. Yes.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. Thank you for the friendly invitation from Susanna. I'm very happy to participate in this webinar. I work with non-formal education. I'm a coordinator of the Letters for Life project, that is a community-based project to promote literacy, and we work with adults, but mostly older adults. I also work with the project Literacy for Democracy, and we have here this morning Manuela Paulo, that is the coordinator of the project. And I'm working on the non-formal adult education, and also studying the participation of civil organizations in this challenge of promoting adult education in Portugal. So we have a reality in Portugal that is quite a challenge, because we have more than 500,000 of adults, both younger and older adults, with no basic competence on reading or writing. So that could be okay. Thank you. So I was talking about the national plan for adult literacy. I don't know if you heard me. So we hope that could be a reality soon. It is because it is an urgent plan for. Thank you. Someone tell me that they can hear me. So it has a participatory approach that is very important, because the problem of literacy is, of course, a social issue that involves everyone. And the promotion of literacy must be integrated into a lifelong learning and educational perspective. So, of course, the promotion of literacy is much more than reading and writing. It's also to promote active citizenship. And that's why we work also in the Literacy for Democracy project that we have here. The coordinator, Manuela Paulo, is here today with us also. So for many people, reading and writing is a dream, especially for the older people. Portugal has high rates of elderly people, and Maria da Conceição, she is a participant of the Letters for Life project that I coordinate, a community-based project that promotes literacy. And she says an important thing. She says, if they are waiting for the illiterate to die, at least make the primary school a mortuary. This is very strong. This is a very strong idea, but is the feeling that Maria has related to the need to stress the literacy for the elderly. So the literacy, the digital literacy can be an attraction to people for other kinds of learning. So as well as the social dynamics promoted by the local providers, by the local actors like municipalities, associations, that can give rise to opportunities for adult education and training. We have in the project Letters for Life, we have some gatherings that could promote the sense of community, and it is very important to prevent isolation and to promote social inclusion. So the response to adult education for basic skills needs materials, resources, and objects, learning objects specifically for adults concerning their diversity and specificities. Materials should be adequate and meaningful with effective and practical value based on local culture, of course, and life, on people's daily needs, based on andragogic approaches, positive, and that start from what people know, not focus on the gaps, but focus on the literacy of life. So people should be valued as well as their life stories, their knowledge, working with them, not just for them. So the methodology should be participatory, based on sharing and linked to life, with horizontal communication strategies, informal, and the intervention should begin with active listening. That could restore the hope for education and promote pedagogy of success, because most of our adults have experienced the pedagogy of insuccess, as the errors and the abandon of the school have a huge impact for the motivation of new participations in learning opportunities. So for professionals, we need specific higher education training in adult education. We need to work with multidisciplinary teams that could need for continuous training, and a real community of practice with a network to share experiences, resources, and materials. We have some associations that do that work, and it can be improved. So we need some sustainable and stable investment for sustainability and professionalization in adult education and literacy. Of course, free access, accessibility, flexibility, diversification, decentralization of educational offerings, with the articulation of the structures. So we have some policies on civil construction, but now we have, the roots are empty in this strange times. And we need civic construction policies for the promotion of lifelong learning and lifelong education. We need to involve everyone: municipalities, associations, social institutions, libraries, senior universities, the leaders of the community that could have resources, internet access, and physical mobility. Now we have some people all over the country that don't have internet, don't have access to internet. And in this time, that could be really an issue. We have primary schools closed in the villages, so we have to reconvert that primary schools for the purpose of educational uses. We have now some primary schools reconverted to tourism uses. That we are a country of a great tourism, of course, but we needed to educational purposes. So we also need a network of community workers with municipal teams of adult education working in local contexts. So to promote the recognition of learning and that training are opportunities for all, we need to invest on communication with proximity. We need to integrate action of education with the social intervention area. So working with social issues also and education. Replacing the system perspective to an empowering perspective. We find, of course, some resistance to participation, but our experience and our research says that a warm, informal environment could solve that. We have too much pressure for results that undermines the educational opportunities. We have adult education offers based on a school model that could be different. So we can have a different kind of perspective, more non-formal one. So some challenges that we have to, we don't have really a coherent and articulate strategy of lifelong learning and education. We don't have the finance that allows sustainability and integrated policy that is fragmented. We need to promote collaboration and not competitiveness in the educational offers. We also need articulation between adult education offers and other kinds of context and participatory logic. That's why we are focused basically, and Raffaela did the wonderful work with the framework she gave us in the beginning of the webinar. And in our country, adult education, this focus on qualification. But it is more than that, of course. We need effective education for life, not just for work. That is important, but is not sufficient. We need to work on adult education for life, for everyone, from young adults to older adults. We also need decentralized structures based on location, with a greater knowledge, proximity, and with good examples that could involve peers and mediators. The community involvement allows greater participation and more recognition of the value of the work to fight the discredit of the value of investment in education, especially in elderly people and in isolation contexts. So we promote the pedagogy of hope, where no one left behind, and we need, of course, a perspective of education for all, with conditions that facilitate participation, access, and also success. As an example, reconciling work and family. Nowadays, this is a kind of trouble. We also need a better communication for adult education at the scientific and technical level, for society in general, but also in the local, regional, national, and why not international visibility, on radio, newspapers, TV, social networks, giving the protagonism to the real protagonists, sharing their stories, and showing, like this gentleman here, that is a participant of Letters for Life project, when he receives his certification. So it is the power and the joy of learning. Adult education can help change lives and transform societies. It is a human right and a common good, like stressed the Manifesto for Adult Learning from EAEA. It is really promoting the hope vested in education to empower adult learnings, restore democracy, build a more just society, and improve lives. I've now wanted to reflect upon the reality that we are living on, maybe an emergency adult education in COVID times, where the perspective of UNESCO, learning never stops, it's a goal. We are now struggling with limited access, with, of course, the great risk of social exclusion and isolation, where technology is really used, but we have some resistance, some inaccessibility, or even low digital skills that difficult use of technology. We try nowadays to compensate the physical distance with social proximity, and we have providers, adult education providers, calling people to maintain that social proximity, to get them involved in learning. That will be, to prepare this presentation, I've been talking with providers and professionals in adult education in Portugal, and I understand the great, the quick reaction they have using their resources, working together, collaborating, and promoting solidarity in these difficult times. So to promote resilience and also transformation of the practices of our reality. They are focused on prevention, on health, on compliance with safety measures, on the defense from domestic violence that is raising now with this confinement situation, to fight all the fake news that are a big problem all over the world, of course, to avoid crime and scams. And now we have in the country, because of the confinement and the suspension of regular classes in education, we are focused on regular education. So professionals are now focused on the kids' education, not really on adult education. That is also a challenge for us. We have, of course, great instability and uncertainty from learners and from professionals. We are now dealing with unemployment, with the loss of income, with the future. So in adult education, we are trying to balance fear and hope. I will give you some quick
Yeah, I think we need to try to wrap up, Dina. So thank you. Just if you want to say something shortly as some last words, yeah?
Yes, I will give you some few examples of the initiatives to promote adult learning in this situation. It is an initiative in codes that is for promoting literacy, digital competences, that has a support line for people to use Skype and other kinds of resources. We have people working at a distance. So we have here an example of IPTV Qualifica Center that is doing a certification session online. We also need emotional and psychological support, and Qualifica centers are working on that. It is a fantastic example. And also an example from a local association that works with adult education that is spreading the friendship virus. That is a wonderful idea that shares poems, videos, messages of hope. We are now need to build new bridges to turn the distance less distant and the present and the future less frightening. As Professor António Dias de Figueiredo said yesterday, in these troubled waters, we all need building while sailing the raft that will take us to a good port. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Many interesting thoughts, and it's very relevant to look at the responses to the COVID-19 situation. I really, we need a lot of pedagogy of hope, and this friendship virus idea seems very inspiring. Thank you. We will move directly to Andreas, so we have time for your input and presentation and thoughts as well. Please, Andreas, continue.
Well, okay. Thank you so much for inviting me for this seminar. Very shortly about myself. I work at Linköping University in Sweden, where I'm directing a group of 28 full-time staff who work with research and teaching in the area of adult education and popular education research. The present... Helena öppnade. Sorry. Yeah, so let's dig into the presentation directly here. Now it seems to be strange. It doesn't show this one. Anyway, very quickly, what I want to focus on shortly here is to present a short overview of adult education in Sweden in order to position the kind of challenges there are today in relation to adult education. And I was going to show you a picture of the entire education system just to get an overview, and then zoom in to focus here on municipal adult education as well as folk high schools as well. So Swedish adult education is consisting of several parts. Actually the major part in terms of full-time students is municipal adult education, which was created in 1968, where people have the right to go to basic adult education and at upper secondary level. That is, you can complete compulsory and upper secondary school. So you can go and get both theoretical as well as vocational courses and gain eligibility for higher education. Part of municipal education is also Swedish for immigrants, where you as a new migrant to Sweden, if you have a resident permit, can partake in learning the language and then continue with adult education, municipal adult education, or going to folk high schools. So this is a formal education governed by a specific curriculum and a specific law, and it's funded by the municipalities. They have to fund this kind of education for free for adults to partake in. And it's partly, or to a large extent, governed by the same course plans as in compulsory and upper secondary school in Sweden. Not fully, but partly. Although there is a specific curriculum for adult education. Folk high schools, that's part of the Swedish free and voluntarily popular education system. It's funded by the state, but they are free from the state. No state-associated curriculum, no grading, etc., etc. However, in Sweden, popular education has emerged in a very tight relation to the state, which is different from some parts of the world. So it's not against the state, but popular education in Sweden is with the state. So that's part of the emergence of the Swedish corporate welfare society in the early 1900s. And within folk high schools, you can take basic courses to gain eligibility for higher education, and you can take specialized courses, which could be vocational or cultural courses. And there are also short courses. And as you can see, there are 156 schools in Sweden, and the first was created 151 years ago. In sum, very shortly, is that there's quite a strong regulation and legislation in Sweden regarding adult education and the right for people to partake. Generally, you could say that adult education in Sweden has three functions: a compensatory function to people who haven't had the possibility or the right support to gain eligibility, to gain compulsory and upper secondary school levels. They can go there and get it. Today, it's mostly migrants, at least in the compulsory level. There's a labor market function for people to be able to get a job, and there's a democratic function of adult education. As I said, municipalities have to offer adult education free to adults, at least the municipal adult education. That's a right. You have a right to take a leave from work to get this, and there's a right for a student loan. As you might know already, this is an old statistics, but you can see here that Sweden has the highest rates of participation in formal and non-formal education and training amongst the most high participation rate in the world. Here you can see the statistics from 2011, 12 or something, I think. And that's partly because of this kind of well-funded and in one way well-built system for adult education, both the formal system and the non-formal system with folk high schools and study associations. Some descriptive statistics. This is something that people in Sweden even doesn't know really or understand, that municipal adult education, which is the left bar here, have more students or participants than the Swedish upper secondary school system for youths. There are more adults going to municipal adult education than there are youths going to Swedish upper secondary school. So it's quite a big system or big participation rates. This is just to show you the participation rates in municipal adult education, so still speaking about formal education over the years. I'm not digging into this, but you can see that there is increasing for the last few years. And the number of students in Swedish for immigrants, of course, as you know, Sweden is one of the countries in Europe who have had the highest rates of migration flows since at least around 2014, 15, 16, after changing to quite harsh regulations in Sweden concerning migration or refugee and for taking asylum seekers. And this, of course, you can see in relation to the engagement in Swedish for immigrants. And that's why you can see this quite high increase of student numbers. So today it's around 160,000 students in Swedish for immigrants. But these students going there, they also take courses, for example, in municipal education, basic courses, or upper secondary school courses. You can also see across the years, which connects to migration, that the share of students within municipal adult education, not counting Swedish for immigrants, of course, but looking at the basic and upper secondary level, have increased substantially from around 25% in 1993 to around 52% of all students today in municipal adult education are migrants. And this is, of course, a big challenge for those working within adult education in Sweden. I'll skip this one. Let's go to folk high schools and going to the issue about migration. We can see the same here. The bar on the top is the share of students within this kind of basic course at folk high schools, and the share of students who are migrants, which are also around 50% of the students today. And the other bars are the other kind of courses. And you can see the green bar, for example, shows that there are around 13% of the students in specialized courses who are migrants. And this is just to show another issue about a challenge for those working at folk high schools and as well as in municipal adult education is that the share of students with different kind of disabilities have increased substantially, or at least a lot, during the last few years. So this was just a very quick overview of trying to summarize that the Swedish adult education system, both formal and non-formal, is quite substantial and well funded by the state and municipalities. What I haven't told you, what I said here, is what the study associations do in terms of study circles. And there are, 1.7 million participants each year in study circles organized by the Swedish study associations, funded mostly through the state. Let's see here. So, what are the main challenges for adult education in Sweden today? And then I'm speaking both about formal adult education as well as non-formal adult education, specifically for high schools. Of course, it's migration, and another issue is the market orientation of adult education. In terms of migration, as I already said, we have had a high inflow of migrants, at least during 14, 15, and 16. Not so many the last few years of different reasons I won't dig into here, of which I'm highly skeptical about the laws currently in place for migration in Sweden. But importantly to notice, among those who are migrants, there are of course both highly educated and low educated adults. However, the share of low educated adults today in Sweden, a major part of that group consists of migrants. So there's been a lot of programs put in place for the last few years in Sweden as probably across Europe in terms of trying to face the challenge with low educated adults, but in Sweden specifically migrants who are low educated and high educated. So there are programs for recognition of prior learning, and there are, for the last few years, a big focus has been on creating vocational course packages in combination with language learning for migrants. Very shortly, but the problem with this kind of focus on employability and trying to push migrants, mostly low educated but partly high educated, into vocational areas, what happens with that kind of focus is that you miss out the focus on the more broader issues of going to adult education in order to become a citizen, an active citizen who can partake in the democratic conversations in Sweden, and to be able to develop yourself as a person rather than focusing on vocations and getting a job. So that's a very critical issue that would need a lot of hours to discuss more, but I'll just make that note. Another issue is that Sweden, as you might know, have probably the most market-oriented education system in the world. And so, in general, for adult education, it's also the case that the market orientation is quite substantial, and this influences the work of those who are engaged in adult education. Almost half of all course participants going, for example, to municipal adult education courses, they engage in a course delivered by a non-public provider, but it's paid by the public. Most of those schools they go to then are funded by the state, but they are owned by big equity firms who want to make a profit of education. This market is also open for folk high schools and study associations, so they have also engaged in providing tenders in order to provide formal education on behalf of the municipalities. So they are part of this market. But folk high schools and study associations also have to try to find new markets, new ways of incomes, and they have always, throughout history, had different kind of specific tasks by the government and have received extra funding for it. But they also now engage, for example, in delivering Swedish for immigrants, formal education programs. And they have also at some locations had the possibility to try to provide youth education for those migrants who go to language introduction at upper secondary school. Some folk high schools have got the right to try to provide this program. So folk high schools are now engaging to some extent with not young adults or not adults or whatever you would say. The marketization of education in Sweden in general, but also in adult education, have different consequences. There is a grade inflation. You go to school, if you don't get your grade quickly as an adult, or you don't get a good grade, you might say that then I'm going to need another provider. So there are we don't have research on this issue in adult education, but based on our experiences in current research projects on marketization of adult education in Sweden, it's very clear that there are a lot of fishy business going on in terms of grading. We can also see that there are cheap education put in place, that teaching is standardized and not individualized, and more students engage as adults in distance education within municipal adult education. And distance education is mostly delivered by private companies who then can make, I would say, make education more cheap. And the question is what happens with the quality and the support students get when going to adult education. And as some teachers in our studies say, we do not teach, but we rather put grades to students. And now I see the time is running out. I just want to make a few final comments about, I'm not going into being normative and saying what should be done. That's not my task as researcher. But I just want to mention that we are currently working in a big research program on migration, learning, and social inclusion. And what the aim is, generally, is to identify adult migrants' trajectories of social inclusion in Sweden, drawing on big longitudinal data, qualitative data, and the meaning-making of adult migrants. And what role does different adult education settings that support migrants to learn the Swedish language, what role does these settings have in the wider trajectories of migrants' processes of hopefully becoming socially included? So far we interviewed 170 migrants, asylum seekers and refugees engaging in different learning settings in Sweden. They have different backgrounds, etc., etc. Half of them are asylum seekers at the time of the interviews. We interviewed 50 teachers and study circle leaders, 20 principals and managers, and we observed teaching and activities at 15 different locations across Sweden. Both activities organized by study associations for asylum seekers, language introduction programs at upper secondary school delivered by both folk high schools and upper secondary schools, and Swedish for immigrants. What we now engage with, and we just got a big research grant from our research council, is to follow these interviews up 2 to 3 years later in order to understand what happened since last time we interviewed you. Was it really so good to go to study associations or folk high schools, as you said at the original interview, or have it been other locations you've been engaged with in education or otherwise that's been more important for you in order to hopefully realize your dreams and have your dreams changed since the last time we spoke with you? So that's basically very shortly what we are up to at the moment. So we are 10 senior researchers involved in these projects, and it's going on for many years. And just in this presentation, you have a couple of current books. One is published a couple of years ago, and which focus on both folk high schools and municipal adult education in Sweden. And one book which is more focused on mapping the research field of adult education. So I'll stop there. My time is running out. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas, for these perspectives and some good overview of some of the trends and developments in Sweden, and some further reading concerning the research in adult education for those of us who are interested. So we have, I hope we can continue for a few minutes before we stop, because we had this technical intermezzo, and now we have, I hope, a few minutes together, even though the time is already 12. So please, there is the opportunity to ask questions. Perhaps we should start with questions that Dragana raised earlier in the questions box. I will try to, perhaps we can make it a bit larger so we see it. It's easier to see it. So Dragana was asking, could you please describe a bit a profile of adult illiterate person in Portugal? And also a second question, what exactly are you doing to replace the old class model with a new one, community logic-based? It's also relating to Portugal. I also found it interesting that you spoke so clearly about the community dimension somehow of adult education and non-formal adult education, Dina. So that's a start. And then please, Andreas and Dina, perhaps you have comments to each other as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Dragana for the great questions. I'll try to answer that. The adult illiterate person in Portugal is mostly women, older, over 65, and that had not the opportunity to go to school when they were a child, because they had to work in early age due to poverty. We have a political context that didn't promote education for all. And in this cultural difficult context, the women were didn't have the opportunity to go to school. It was not considered necessary for the women to go to school. So now we have mostly women, but also we have some ethnical minorities. We have Roma people that are not so old. We have young Roma women and also some men that need to improve their basic skills of literacy, but also other minorities. They have a difficult time in school. School was not capable of responding their needs, and they find in non-formal opportunities of learning and local-based providers an opportunity to learn and to engage in a learning pathway that improves their qualification, but also their relation to life and their social participation and social inclusion. So we have some historical issues concerning the difficulty to get to school and to have success in school. And we have still nowadays some problems because we have young students in school, but they don't have the basic skills that they need. So we have different kind of answers, like the second opportunity schools, that are wonderful to answer this kind of population. So I don't know if I could answer the first question that Dragana shared with us. I will try to answer the second. So the model of adult education in Portugal, it is based on the framework of the school, but it is now with recognition of prior learning. The qualification centers are doing a great job to value and validate the literacy of life that people have. But we have a richness in the civil society, in local organizations that are community-based. And it is very important to value that kind of efforts that the local providers are doing. And for that kind of efforts, we need to support that. We understand that policies need to give some kind of sustainability to this kind of offers. So to promote a community logic approach, we try to work together to communicate to the local actors, to local protagonists, to people in a proximity kind of approach that can values the work of each actor in the local perspective, that could answer in a proper way to the needs and the potentialities of that community. That is very rich for the results of the learning engagement. We have another question for Sylvia.
Yeah.
Is the educational offers for adults in organic too? Yes, it is. It is linked to the National Qualifications Framework.
Yes,
yes.
That's the short answer. I was just reflecting when you talk about kind of creating a development with a more community, with a more of a community dimension. It's kind of a contrast to the development that you are speaking of, Andreas, regarding marketization and big equity firms running somehow or owning the companies that carry out education in Sweden. They are, as I would perceive it, not so interested in the community dimension and to be involved as local actors. Of course, the study associations and folk high schools are very much a part of local development and local community building. All right. Feel free, Dina and Andreas, if you have further reflections. I think you highlighted, Dina, some of the kind of potential role of adult education in this situation we are facing and the effects of the crisis. I guess this is something that is very this is top of our mind these days. How can we respond? How can we play a part? What will be also the effects? Some are facing perhaps very difficult situations financially in the both in the short perspective and in the longer perspective. Do you have any further input, Andreas, for example, regarding the potential effects of the crisis looking ahead?
Not really. I mean, I wouldn't want to speculate too much on that. Really, as this is a totally new situation. But rather, no, not really. But I mean, I could comment on another issue, which I think, based on the studies we've done so far on this research program, as we've been both located in formal adult education, in youth education, delivered both by folk high schools and regular upper secondary schools, as well as activities for asylum seekers organized by study associations. What was quite interesting, not very surprising though, is that first of all, all these 170 migrants, they were very happy with the activities, no matter where they were engaged. But what was quite clear was that, for example, that the activities organized by study associations were much more, as you said, August, it's of course much more community-based, and it's much more because of the kind of more big freedom and because study associations work with a lot of volunteers. So what happened was that these study associations were very engaged, not only in delivering language education, which they were paid to do by the state, but they also, for these asylum seekers, helped them with everything, you know, from contacting their lawyers to the migration board, organizing doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, playing football with them outside of the study circle. You know, they made this kind of the social work. They weren't paid for this, but they did it anyway. While if you look at the formal education system, they of course didn't do. I mean, of course they were very helpful and important persons for the migrants, but I mean they are governed by regulations and they are paid for the work. They are they are professionals in another way, so it wasn't the kind of same social work at those places. And even at the folk high schools, where they recruited teachers to the folk high schools who were teachers for the regular school system, you could see that there were difference of the kind of engagement were quite. Anyway, there is quite interesting differences based on our observations of formal and non-formal education and how it plays out.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. Sari is also writing, I would have liked to hear more of the longitudinal research from Andreas and what previous findings, etc., is based on. Maybe that's a question for outside of the scope of this webinar, as our time is running out. I think we should begin to wrap up if there is no pressing question besides the previous ones. So let me say many thanks to you, Raffaela and Dina and Andreas, for taking part and sharing your thoughts, and to all of you who have participated. We will make the recording available on the project webpage, and I hope we will also upload the presentations, the slides used, so you can find them there and continue to have some further reading. Thank you very much for today, and to follow our next steps within this project, AEPRO, I think it's easiest to follow the Facebook page of EAEA, perhaps, for next activities and updates. Many thanks. We stop the recording, and